Please take your seats.
Dear guests, please kindly take your seats. We will start in 10 minutes. 10 seconds, sorry.
We start our session, and I'm really pleased to welcome all of you. And I will speak in Russian. I hope that we have translation. Thank you, colleague. Ваше превосходительство, господин
Dear Excellency, Mr. Suklan, dear Pavel Knyazev, dear Excellency, Mr. Rodrigo de Lima Baena Suarez, dear Mr. Van, dear Mr. Maharaj, I'm glad to welcome you and all the listeners to the traditional 24th International Conference, Academic Conference on the Problems of Development of Economy and Society. This conference has 3,000 guests, over 600 papers, reports on various topics. It's a large expert platform with a high level of representation and broadest geography, and is held on the basis of this university. I would like to thank you all for your participation in the discussion and your willingness to engage in dialogue. Today, the world is changing rapidly, and such events and platforms are important. They bring together the public sector, the academic community, the economic sector. At the next room next door, there is a meeting where ministers discuss new types of engineering universities. And our colleagues are there. At some point, I will have to excuse myself and move there. But of course, I had to be here to launch this important session. It allows us to strengthen further the dialogue between our countries. On the basis of this, we'll give food for thought to the leaders of the state to develop and propose new ideas, not only research but practical in nature. Today's plenary session is entitled BRICS Development Strategy, Equal Opportunities in an Unequal World. We see a rapid development of opportunities in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and the unequal model of the world order is becoming a thing of the past. Last week, Russia adopted a new foreign policy concept. Let me quote a fragment. Only by combining the potential and honest efforts of the entire international community based on a balance of power and interest that can we provide effective solutions to the numerous issues and problems of our time. And that's exactly what the BRICS seeks to achieve. This year, our South African friends hold the chairmanship of BRICS. And let me wish every success to the South African BRICS Sherpa, Mr. Anil Suklan, who is with us today. and we wish you every success in your endeavor. The theme of BRICS today is acquiring a new meaning. Strengthening the capacity, international role of the interstate association. BRICS means promoting multipolarity, justice, and depoliticized, mutually beneficial dialogue on an equal basis. The extended format of the BRICS Plus dialogue is of utmost importance. We shall speak on that today. I'm confident that our joint and common work in this expanded format will contribute to the development of our economies. An expanded dialogue fully meets the needs of regional and inter-regional economic integration for the formation of the Greater Eurasian Partnership. Let me quote the President of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin, who said, "Now more than ever, leadership of the BRICS countries needed to develop a unifying and positive course." As is known, over 10 countries expressed interest in joining the BRICS, and a number of countries have applied to join. Building a dialogue with those countries within the BRICS framework can only bring additional opportunities. We, as HSC, a leading research university in Russia, with high international reputation, are interested in mutually beneficial cooperation with partners from the BRICS countries in various areas. We do give a lot of attention to research on socio-economic and political processes in this country and in each individual BRICS member country. There is an International Center for Competition Law and Policy, BRICS International Center. We are a member of the International Thematic Group on Economics within the BRICS Network University, where colleagues work on the development of joint educational research programs and other projects. We're actively working as a university on integration projects in the sphere of scientific research and education. And your humble servant, the rector of this university, who was entrusted with the task of launching this session, has one deficiency with regard to BRICS. I have not visited yet BRICS one member country, Brazil, and having a Brazilian ambassador, I hope I will make it to Brazil, and this will serve having a full and complete dialogue with BRICS country. So, as we see, we are open to dialogue with partners from the countries and other constructive countries, and I'm sure that this session will be constructive, and I wish everyone a fruitful discussion and pass the floor to the moderator of the session. Thank you very much. Thank you, dear Dr. Anisima. Thank you for finding time. This is an extremely important theme with a unique list of speakers. We just back from Russia today information and got some promise from South African Sherpa that our recommendations based on these discussions will be given to the South African Sherpa as part of the official track. It's only through closer interaction between the expert track and the official track we can have fruits. And Pavel Knyazev, ambassador at large on BRICS, and we have is here too with us at this session, and we are sure that Russia will give utmost attention to what the scholars and everybody present will come to as part of this roundtable discussion. Allow me to give the floor to the first speaker of the session. First, we'll have Sergei Ryabkov, who is also Deputy Minister of the Russian Federation. Please switch on his address. Dear friends, I'm glad to welcome the organizers and participants of the 24th Yasin April International Academic Conference, an authoritative expert platform which discusses a wide range of issues on the global agenda. A rich program of this event provides an opportunity to analyze global trends, national strategies, prospects, and practical means of developing the economy and society not only in this country but also abroad. This year's plenary session of the conference is devoted to the International Association, BRICS, and its role in shaping the global political and economic architecture. I see this as an unambiguous recognition of the fact that the Five has become an influential factor of contemporary international relations. In the midst of the ongoing degradation of global governance institutions and the entire system of world economic relations, caused in fact by the miscalculations and neo-colonial policies of the United States and their allies, attention to the BRICS as a voice of the interests of the developing world is only growing. This association represents this synergy of cultures and civilizations from different regions of the planet, the conjunction of new centers of power in world politics, the global economy and finance, specifically in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. This is why BRICS is rightly seen as one of the pillars of a more just world order, a guardian of genuine multilateralism based on respect for international law and sovereign choice of one's own path for development. A strategic partnership of BRICS provides and offers to the world a future-oriented initiative based on seeking collective answers to the most topical, pressing issues of the international agenda, including achieving sustainable development goals, ensuring food and energy security, promoting post-pandemic global economic recovery, and combating climate change. Our countries have everything they need to do this. Together, we represent over 40% of the world's population, about 30% of the Earth's landmass, 1/3 of the world's GDP and purchasing power parity. This is more than the G7 states. Mutual trade between the countries of this association shows strong growth, despite the effects of the pandemic and other obstacles. BRICS countries are major producers and consumers of agricultural products and energy resources. BRICS accounts for more than 1/3 of the world's food, including over 40% of world grain production. And there are all the prerequisites for increasing this capacity. BRICS is attractive to most non-Western countries because it has no so-called hidden agenda and is not directed against anyone. There is no hegemon imposing its approaches on others in BRICS, and cooperation is built on the basis of equality, mutual respect, and a sound balance of interests. Few formats have these qualities to their credit. BRICS multidisciplinary and multifaceted cooperation is based on the principles of openness, pragmatism, solidarity, consensus, and continuity, regardless of global political situation. The priority areas of cooperation are defined by the current specific challenges faced by the entire world, including BRICS. Evidence of the developing world's interest in this association was a strong positive response to the last year's announcement of intensified discussions about the possibility of its expansion. A significant number of countries, prominent players regionally and globally, in one way or another, have shown a desire to develop ties with the BRICS. The Five are open to dialogue and interaction with external partners and forming their own permanent circle of friends. Let me emphasize that the institutional strengthening of the association is expansion and development of cooperation with third countries, including in the outreach format or BRICS Plus format, requires a calibrated approach and painstaking hard work. There's an in-depth discussion within the group which is underway to determine the guiding principles, criteria, standards, and necessary procedures. It will also be necessary to find a common ground for launching such a process. And then we could move on to considering specific candidates from the developing world. Now, there's no hurry, and we are not going to drag this out either. I'm convinced that today's discussion will provide new interesting ideas for developing BRICS strategic partnership. We at the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs are interested in developing a dialogue with the academic and expert community and look forward to further fruitful cooperation. Also within the framework of the recently established Expert Council on Russia's participation in BRICS. I'm confident that its work will make a significant contribution to informational, analytical support of BRICS events, including those in the context of the upcoming Russian presidency in the starting 2024. In 2024, promoting a positive image of and popularizing achievements of BRICS, both in these countries and outside. I wish all the participants interesting meetings, informative discussions, and all the best. And thank you very much for your attention. We know that you have a very tight schedule and you had consultations with colleagues. Besides Sergei Ryabkov, besides BRICS, he is dealing with bilateral relations with North and South American countries, which is not a simple task. Non-proliferation of and arms control, nuclear program issues, and being a BRICS Sherpa, and he's fully engaged and never having time. Mr. Ryabkov was actually at the inception of BRICS, the academic, civil BRICS, all of those forums are in place and working and always being supported by Russia, by Mr. Ryabkov. And let me remind you, 2015, when Russia was chairmanship, we had this forum with all the full support from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia. Now let me give the floor to Professor Anil Suklal, a South African Sherpa to BRICS, which has been working in the international department for over 20 years, and probably the best example of combining academic activity, because you began as a professor, and diplomatic activity, being an ambassador to Belgium, European Union, and Geneva, United Nations, and now with great enthusiasm and use for multilateral, bilateral relations, there is this Sherpa work to BRICS. Professor Suklal, you have the floor. If you could tell us about South African priorities in BRICS, your vision, and we discussed it somewhat earlier, that BRICS in this turbulent world is, on the one hand, is a problem and issue, but also an opportunity and opportunities for BRICS which should not be forfeited or missed. And we would like to understand how we could help as an academic community. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let me first express my deep gratitude to HSE University and personally to you, Dr. Panova, for giving me this privilege to be at this wonderful institution and to be part of this august assembly this morning. Let me also acknowledge my dear friend and colleague, Ambassador Pavel Knyazev, who I've worked with for many, many years. and also in absentia to acknowledge Deputy Minister Rybakov, the Russian Sherpa, who's really the dean of us. And I've had the privilege of working and learning from him over these past 12 years that I've been part of the BRICS family. And to all of the other eminent speakers and invited guests, it's really a privilege to be here in Russia. Russia is always, as I say to Pavel, a second home for us. You have had such a close relationship with South Africa and played such an important role in our freedom and liberation. You are part of our history, and history is something that we always remember and cherish. So being here amongst friends is a great privilege. Right now, there are changes, the likes of which we haven't seen for 100 years. And we are the ones driving these changes. Those are the words of President Xi here in Moscow just over 2 weeks ago, as he bid farewell to President Putin. And President Putin replied, I agree. Now, I would like to think that what President Xi was articulating and which was endorsed by President Putin was not the view just of China and Russia, but the collective view of BRICS and the Global South. And I'm sure that is what was meant by it. We are extremely privileged to be part of this BRICS family. Now, BRICS didn't develop overnight. There was a vacuum in the global geopolitical architecture, and that vacuum was rightfully filled by BRICS. Now, it was not Jim O'Neill in 2001 who of course coined this term BRIC, that should take credit for this. In fact, if you go back to the World Bank report of 1998, you'd have already seen that report identify a group of breakout nations, emerging market developing economies. And 5 countries in particular are mentioned in that report, the 4 BRICS countries minus South Africa. Of course, we had just emerged out of our apartheid regime and just entered the democratic dispensation. The 5th country was Indonesia. And my theory is that Jim O'Neill built on this report because he didn't include Indonesia because the Suharto regime was in deep trouble, late 90s, and you had internal turmoil in Indonesia that precluded the inclusion of Indonesia. Perhaps Indonesia is a good candidate in an expanded BRICS, but I'll come to that later on. But I'm saying that the emergence of BRICS was due to developments in all of our countries starting in the early 90s. China was growing at double digits, following Deng's leadership. You had successive leadership that built on this. I've been very privileged to have been part of state visits under 3 Chinese presidents, the past 3, including the present. India had Narasimha Rao coming into power in 91 with Manmohan Singh as his finance minister and transforming the Indian landscape. Brazil, likewise, the difficulties you experienced. Late 70s, early 80s, you had Itmar Franco and Henrique Cardoso, who set a new template that by the time Lula came to the stage in 2003, you had a very different Brazil. Same with South Africa. We had emerged out of the dark days of apartheid into a democratic dispensation. And likewise, the African continent was transforming. If you look at The Economist of 2000, the front headline was Lost Continent, hopeless continent, in fact. And in 2002, in South Africa, we transformed the OAU into the African Union. So Africa was also changing. So you had seminal historical changes leading up to the emergence of the Global South. Of course, it took some time. The template for South-South cooperation goes back to Bandung in 1955, when the leaders of Africa Asia as newly emerging independent sovereign states, set out a new template of global cooperation and peaceful coexistence. The 5 principles of peaceful coexistence was enunciated there because they had a vision of an inclusive world, having been savaged and ravaged by colonialism, imperialism, apartheid, that we wanted to build a new global community of inclusiveness, collaboration, peaceful coexistence. And this is the template on which BRICS built. So when you had the emergence of BRICS first at the level of foreign ministers in 2006, when they met on the margins of UNGA in New York, it was building on all of this past experiences that we collectively had. But we were in a position to emerge because, as said, there was a vacuum. When the G7 was created in 1975, they took it upon themselves to determine what is best for the global community. So you had global agenda setting on all fronts, the economic, political, financial, whatever you have it, even determining how we live. So there was a deep need for the global South to take their destiny into their own hands and to be part of the global debate in terms of what happened in this new millennium. Because you saw the same, the emergence of Russia post the Yeltsin years. By the time Putin came to power, you had stabilized and reclaimed your position as a leading power on the global stage. So amongst all of us, from South Africa and Africa to India, to Russia, and to Brazil, you had stable, strong governments. So you had all the key ingredients for us to come together and impact positively on the global stage. And this is what happened. Of course, the emergence of BRICS created a lot of interest, positive and negative. I think amongst the global South there was an embrace that you had a collective voice articulating not just the needs of the 5 countries, but articulating what the weak and marginalized could not do individually. But when you have 5 countries from all parts of the world, different continents, coming together and forming a powerful force. Because remember, G7 came together on the basis that they were the most powerful economies, even though China was amongst them. You were excluded from that group. But with BRICS, we respected our sovereignties, our systems of governance, and we even respected our diversity and embraced that diversity that brought us together into this collective as a powerful force of the global South. And in a short period, remember G20 will be 50 years in 2 years' time. In a short period, BRICS has emerged, and this morning I was reading an article from a researcher at the Institute of Security and Strategic Studies in Berlin, the German institute, who describes BRICS as a counterweight to the G7. Now they do that constantly. They describe us as competition, as counterweight, as trying to compete. That was not, as I said, that was not the template on which we came together. We came together on a common template because the world had changed dramatically. Post-1945 world, we'll be celebrating 80 years of the founding of the UN in 2 years' time. Dramatic change in terms of the global architecture. Most of us, in 1945, India was not even independent. South Africa was under apartheid and colonial rule. China was not even in power, the CPC. So you had a very different template when the UN system and the rules and principles were being articulated. We were still struggling to establish ourselves as sovereign nations. So obviously when we say we want reform, and that's why you will see a common theme in every BRICS chairship, and that's why we have continuity, is about real reform an inclusive global multilateral architecture. Because what has the Common West done to this architecture? They claim to be the architects of the so-called liberal order, but they are actually the dismantlers of this order today. And I think it was one of the Indian writers, Brahmachalani, who spoke of us living in a world of global disorder. We are living in between orders. We know as BRICS what type of global structure we'd like to have in place. But we also know those that have been at the forefront of determining what is best for the global collective are preventing the emergence of such an architecture. And I know this from experience. Having been involved, I was saying to Victoria, what I see happening on the macro level, on the global stage, is so much a replication of apartheid South Africa, the dying days of the apartheid regime, a power that was waning and knew that they had no future. But they were not constructive. They were forced to enter into negotiations because no one wants to hand over power, because power gives you such control of the lives of the people, of the global community. And this is what BRICS is not about and what we're trying to dismantle. That let's make space around this high table. There are other role players, responsible member states that have emerged and can contribute positively in reshaping this global architecture positively for the benefit of all of humanity. When we adopted the SDGs in 2015, we said, let's not leave anyone behind. But I said that is just a good catchphrase. How have we behaved since we adopted the SDGs? We have left even more behind. We saw this during COVID, when we had an opportunity to work in tandem with each other in partnership, because we had a common enemy. It didn't matter where COVID struck, whether you were the most powerful country in the world, whether you were the biggest economy in the world, or whether you were an island state in the Pacific or the Indian Ocean. It impacted all of us. But we used that, as Rasigan was saying earlier this morning, to indoctrinate a new apartheid. We call it in South Africa vaccine apartheid. We saw this. It was BRICS countries that came together because we are a caring, humane community and want to positively impact on the global stage. And this is what the template on which BRICS is built on. And as Vice Minister Rybakov correctly pointed out, we have trust between ourselves. We have the concept of mutual benefit and working as a collective for the benefit of each other and the larger community, not just the global south, even though that's our first point of reference. So South Africa has the privilege of leading BRICS for the third time this year, and I have been very privileged to have served under the chairships of each of the BRICS countries at least twice over. I'm the second veteran after Sergei Rybakov in the BRICS family, having been there for a long time, to see how this structure has evolved. And I must say, I'm not saying it because we are all part of BRICS. I was saying to Victoria that over the past 2 months or so in Pretoria, at least 6 or 7 ambassadors from the Europe region, including the EU ambassador, all came to see me to ask 2 questions. What's happening in BRICS under your chairship? And what's happening, how is Russia still continuing in BRICS? Because in February last year, you would have seen the global media, BRICS is history. But I said to the EU ambassador, when she asked me this question, why this sudden interest? As Victoria pointed out, over a dozen countries have formally written or formally approached BRICS leaders collectively to become members, full members of BRICS. She asked me why this sudden interest. So I said, you know the answer, because you are actually contributing to make us the flavor of the day. Through your actions, through your selfish actions, through your unilateral sanctions. We don't believe in that. BRICS is built on the basis of us working together. Even with the global north, we are not in opposition to you. You see us as an opposition bloc. We are not. We are no bloc. We are a group of countries that want to positively impact and address the real challenges in the world. A world that has produced more trillionaires and billionaires over the COVID period and pushed hundreds of millions into extreme poverty, joblessness, and you don't address these issues. Your own societies are in dire straits. You have seen on global media images of European countries' social upheavals, joblessness, inequality. I was saying to Victoria, I've visited New York, I think, over the past 35 years on a regular basis. And I was last there we were there, Pavel, for the BRICS meeting on the margins of Unga. And I like walking around. And I've never seen so much of homelessness and poverty on the streets of New York that I saw during this visit. But it's all swept under the carpet. As you see the rise of emerging market, the global south, you see the decline of the common west. And this is the contestation that is taking place, and why there is this policy of containment, be it containment of China, be it containment of Russia, be it containment of BRICS. And we are saying, when you have a pot boiling on a stove, the lid will fly off if you try to stamp the lid down. It's natural science. You can't. Rather, let us work in tandem with each other. And this is what we are saying. Isolating Russia, be it through political means, economic means, from sporting bodies, cultural bodies, academic institutions, will never work. It failed in Cuba. It failed in Libya. It failed in Iraq. It will never work. Instead of undermining the very system that we have jointly created, the multilateral global architecture, is today, I say it's semi-paralyzed. It's a term Celso Amorim used many years ago, Ambassador, I'm sure you're aware. It's padlocked, and the keys are with the West, the common West. They don't want to open that. And we are saying it's time that we collectively sit. And this is what BRICS stand for. And therefore, in our chairship, I know, Victoria, I have 1 minute left. I can read your mind. That as the chair this year, South Africa, we've always used BRICS to enhance and advance the partnership between BRICS and Africa. We did that in 2013. We will do that. We did that in 2018, and we'll do so again. So our theme is BRICS and Africa, partnership for mutually accelerated growth, sustainable development, and inclusive multilateralism. I don't have to explain that. It contains everything that we should involve ourselves in BRICS. And I firmly believe that while we are in the midst of a global crisis, it's a major opportunity for BRICS. And BRICS should take advantage of this in terms of asserting our view of how we see the new global architecture, geopolitical, geoeconomic architecture evolving. Because you would have seen even at UNGA, small countries today are standing up and saying, no, we're not going to be part of your side. Don't divide us into sides. We will decide for ourselves what is right. You can't have 13 or 14% of the global community deciding for 85% plus of the global community of what is right for us. And BRICS is that voice that will take forward the agenda of the global south and the collective agenda of ourselves. And we are preparing for a physical summit after 4 years in August in South Africa. And I believe it will be an important moment for our leaders to reflect on the journey we have traveled this past 15 years and set a template in terms of where we'd like to see ourselves. Last point, I said this to Victoria. In 2019, I was invited to give a lecture on the emergence of China at one of our think tanks, Mistra, which is one of the leading think tanks. And I said this decade is going to be a seminal decade. The world of 2030 is going to be vastly different. It's already changed. India just overtook its former colonial power, the fifth largest global economy. That's why they're giving you so much of problems on the global stage, interfering internally with you. That this decade will be dominated by 5 C's. Greater cooperation, because of the interconnected world we live in, new technologies. Greater competition, and healthy competition is good for all of us. Greater contestation, conflict, and the big last C is China. This was my view, and I said to Victoria, had I given this lecture in 2020, I would have added a 6C, which had been COVID. But thank you for giving me this privilege and opportunity.
Your Excellency, thank you so much for this really passionate and touching speech, the one that gives out a lot of energy and ideas for thought. And you know that Russia will host Russia-Africa Summit in July, and I think it would be a great opportunity to use South Africa's presidency in BRICS, especially considering that the focus will be on developing the African continent as a whole at that forum. We could move that agenda even further. And one other point I wanted to bring home is that I really was happy when you mentioned the G-Manila and the sources of BRICS. As someone who has been involved in BRICS, it always pains me to hear how one phrase that Jim O'Neill was the one who launched the BRICS process, was the one behind it, was another attempt to use the experts community to push the colonial discourse that would say that we are not capable ourselves to promote our own interests and create something of our own. Instead, we need some great mind in the West who would direct us in the right way or send us on the right path. And there have been a plethora of articles that are asking the question, how can we turn the BRICS around and make sure that they are walking in the right direction? Because now they are not doing that. So it is very important for us to ensure that BRICS is perceived as an organization that was assembled as the initiative of its peoples, and not because of someone's prodding. And within each of the BRICS countries, we have independent leaders, and the countries were brought together by their respect for principles of international law, UN Charter, UN's central role, diversity and multiculturalism. These are the key notions for us. And you also mentioned the UN reform. It seems to me that BRICS could serve as the new P5 that could advance this opportunity to facilitate the construction of a new and fair world. But that is just a side comment. Maybe it's a little bit too brave to say, but I wanted to mention that having listened to you. And now,
let me give the floor to His Excellency Rodrigo de Lima Baiana Soares, Ambassador of Federated Republic of Brazil and Russian Federation. He started his diplomatic career in 1987 winning a public competition. During his career, he held high posts in the Ministry of International Affairs and the staff of the President of the Federated Republic of Brazil, served in the permanent representation of the United Nations, He was invited, as his part of academic career, invited professor Institute of Political Studies in Paris, National University of La Plata, Argentina, and combines academic and diplomatic endeavor. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you. Добрый день, дорогие друзья.
Good afternoon, dear friends.
Я очень рад быть здесь.
I'm very happy to be here with you.
Сейчас я должен говорить по-английски.
Now I may have to speak English.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Vittoria Panova, Ambassador Kniazev, Dr. Emil Suklau, and I also like to recognize the presence of Professor Alexander Zebit. He's I would say a Russian-Brazilian professor, if I may say so, and also Professor Ana Lívia, who is also among us. It's an honor to be here at this international academic conference organized by Higher School of Economics to speak about the priorities of the Brazilian foreign policy regarding the BRICS. Our foreign policy is conceived as a broad task to achieve the set of Brazilian public policies in terms of economic growth, environment, agriculture, education, culture, science, technology, innovation, human rights, social development, and defense. In order to achieve such goals, Brazil firmly believes in this recession in its region and in the world in a way that best corresponds to our values and interests. I'd like to remind you that we have a new administration in Brazil since January 1st with President Lula, who took office the beginning of this year. Apart from strengthening our ties with our neighbors, which is the main priority of our foreign policy, we advocate, as a South American and developing country, for a fair and more geographically equal representation of our regions of the world in the multilateral sphere. Brazil and other emerging countries want to have a voice on the international stage. We cannot live with outdated decision-making structures that do not reflect the contribution they can make to face common challenges. Updating global governance in the third decade of the 21st century is an urgent task. In that regard, we firmly believe that the BRICS is a fundamental tool for consolidating multipolarity, enhancing the representativeness of developing countries, and advancing the global governance reform agenda. This is a coinciding vision among all BRICS members, which unites major emerging powers. In concrete terms, the BRICS encourages political coordination in multilateral fora. In 2022, our countries were represented in the UN Security Council, which contributed to expanding discussions within the group on issues of peace and international security. The BRICS is also seen from the Brazilian perspective as a tool to ensure economic growth and development. Since its last presidency in 2019, Brazil has emphasized the branches of cooperation with greatest potential for generating concrete results for Brazilian citizens, including science, technology and innovation, health, and above all, cooperation in economic, financial, and commercial spheres. The Brazilian presidency organized more than 100 meetings in 2019, including 16 at the ministerial level. The Brasilia Summit, held in November, was attended by all heads of state and of the 5 members. Brazil transferred its presidency of the group, originally scheduled for 2024, to 2025, since we are going to preside over the G20 next year. The Russian government has kindly accepted our proposal of assuming the presidency in 2024. The current year presents unique opportunities for deepening our interaction within the BRICS as a result of the South African presidency. This will allow for increased dialogue among its members and with the African continent, which is another priority, a very clear priority of the Brazilian foreign policy. The BRICS expansion process is currently one of the most pressing issues of the group, given the differences in perspective among its members regarding the criteria for its expansion. Brazil takes a careful approach, advocating for a thorough and transparent definition of these criteria. Another fundamental aspect of the BRICS is a new development bank. We see the NDB as an important source for financing infrastructure and sustainable development of its members. We believe the bank has made a positive contribution for curbing the effects of COVID-19 pandemic, such as the inauguration of the BRICS Vaccine Research and Development Center. The former president of Brazil, Dilma Rousseff, took office as the new president of the NDB in last March. Brazil welcomed the first expansion of the new development bank in September 2021 with the accession of 4 new members: Uruguay, Egypt, United Arab Emirates, and Bangladesh. Brazil views in a positive way the gradual and balanced expansion of this institution, NDB. I hope I have been able to outline the main perspectives of Brazil regarding the BRICS. We have intensive years of work ahead of us. We are certain that BRICS can play a positive and constructive role in the international sphere in order to revert the actual tendency of instability and crisis, as well consolidating multipolarity, enhancing the representativeness of developing countries, and advancing the global governance reform agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. You've mentioned that there's a swap between Russia and Brazil in terms of chairmanship. I recall that when there was a previous swap and there was a soccer World Cup in Brazil, and this was an opportunity for BRICS leaders not only to spend their time usefully, but with great pleasure. And yes, and the main thing, as we speak, the main thing is not to win, but to participate. And all the participants got so much pleasure from being there at the time. It's important for Brazil to be one of the champions for scientific scholarly cooperation in innovations, and a key pillar for BRICS further development, making it possible for us, if not accelerated development, but our possibility for us to maintain our positions at the forefront, not only referring to sanctions. There is always a glass ceiling for any developing countries in terms of technology transfer. And as was said by our South African shepherd, we don't have here such constraints and limitations. We are ready to share the achievements and accomplishments will help us move at all key fronts. Thank you very much again. And let me give the floor to Nandan Unikrishnan, our big friend, honorary member of the Observer Research Foundation and leading expert organization in India and worldwide. In the Research Foundation, he's in charge of the Eurasian Research Program, and he continues to be a BRICS veteran, having been an attendee for all academic fora, starting the first one. And this academic conference was launched before BRICS was established. And Nandan Manikrishnan knows about the development of the association from all perspectives and aspects, and always keeps reminding us about the gaps for us to move faster. And we do count on you as a person who will not let us sit idle or relax too much. Thank you very much.
Very kind words. Needless to say that I don't deserve most of them, except one. That is that I am an old relic from the historical roots of BRICS, and soon you may find me as part of the archaeological surveys that are conducted. I have to confess that I haven't really kept in touch with BRICS for the past 3-4 years, except in a broad sense. But I have to acknowledge the address by my good friend Anil. He, in his summing up of everything, has literally brought me up to speed. It is not as if I have missed anything. You know, Anil, thank you very much. I mean, that was really, really very inspiring. And what that brings us to is the fact that there isn't much that has really changed in terms of the BRICS agenda. When we started way back in 2008 and today in 2023, we still are facing the same problem, that we are looking for greater voice, greater representation, and greater collaboration amongst not just BRICS, but the global south. As Anil has pointed out, there has been some progress, in some areas very significant. BRICS has overcome the skepticism that existed in the beginning. It is a body that is recognized. It is a body to which now many aspire membership. So that in itself is a credit. And it is also, in a sense, the fact that the BRICS is attacked by others suggests that BRICS is somewhat successful, because it is moving forward the agenda of changing the world in favor of the less endowed, if you want, the less privileged in this society. The changes in the past couple of years, in my opinion, have made things a little bit more complicated. And whereas I completely concede that the agenda is still the same, but its implementation in some ways has become more difficult. Undoubtedly, this is a movement towards a greater period of multipolarity. Undoubtedly, the BRICS will have to expand, but I completely agree with the Brazilian ambassador that the process has to be completely transparent. The criteria has to be extremely clear and acceptable so that everyone understands how and what you arrive into the BRICS. But I would like to focus on one particular challenge, which I think requires more attention. And that challenge is that amongst the many common challenges that the BRICS faces, whether it is the issue of the pandemic or others, there is one challenge that we are going to be most affected by, not just BRICS, but the global south. And the BRICS has to consider taking leadership on this issue, because our countries are in some ways going to be the worst affected. And I'm talking about, one is climate change, and the second is the development challenge. The one common agenda of the global south, including the BRICS, is development. And one common challenge is climate change. Where does that put us together? It brings a specific problem which did not exist earlier. The global West, which dominates the world in terms of money, industry, everything, they were able to develop because they burnt fossil fuels with as if there was no tomorrow. But the global south doesn't have that chance. So we are going to be the first generation, if you want, of countries that are going to complete the process of industrialization, but we will not be able to use fossil fuels, or rather use fossil fuels to the extent that is required, which makes our development that much more challenging, both in terms of finance as well as technology. Because even access to technology, unfortunately, is not entirely with the global south. And we all have been through the experience of the more developed exploiting when it comes to issues of technology. So I think this brings up two challenges in front of us, which we need to be conscious about. And now I am trying to live up to the words of Victoria, that I'm not going to let you relax too much. One is that whether we like it or not, unfortunately, or fortunately, whichever way you look at it, the global West is also part of the same world. And the global West is the one where the resources exist in a much larger amount. So we cannot completely ignore the fact that our development of the global south, to a large extent, also depends on the transfer of that financial and technological resource to facilitate our development and other challenges. So I think one is that, yes, the agenda remains the same in terms of looking for greater voice, greater representation, redistribution of power in global institutions, financial and otherwise. And I think excellent example was given of the NDB, of how it has become a very powerful weapon in the hands of BRICS. In fact, it should be expanded, it should increase its financial base. But we need to find other mechanisms also of greater cooperation. And at the same time, very carefully walk the line of not allowing us to become, while we can stay anti-imperialist, we should not become anti-West. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your very important intervention. And I would now refer to what Mr. Suklal had said earlier. The BRICS was never formed against anyone. We don't have any desire to be a counterweight to anyone. They want to picture us as that. And the key for us is to facilitate our own development and that of other developing nations. We need to reformat this world into a more just world, but we don't want to counter anyone. And related to this, we have heard about this in different speeches before me. There's a BRICS Development Bank. It is a very important for technology transfer, for the infrastructure development, for the financial side of the cooperation. I mentioned this earlier, but let me say it again, that we have a framework agreement, 5-partite agreement on trading in national currencies, but that has not gone any further than the framework. And I would like to take this opportunity, considering that we have 3 officials from BRICS present here, maybe I could push you to develop this aspect more actively. And of course, we will be doing our part. This is very important, especially considering that we need to preserve our sovereignty and financial and economic security. Also crucial is to create maybe a common payment currency for the BRICS nations, an even more challenging part of our work, but it is something that someone needs to work on, including us experts. So thank you so much. And now I would like to give the floor to Mr. Wen Wang, the Executive Dean of the Chongyang Institute of Financial Studies, Vice President of the Silk Road School, People's University of China. And so we now have the academic regalia or positions that we mentioned, but Mr. Wang is also a consultant to several important Chinese ministries and commissions. He has visited over 100 countries, including, if I'm not mistaken, the South Pole, and has conducted extensive research and field studies, allowing him to make a lot of recommendations. And a lot of his research reports have been used at the highest level in China. He was at one point editor-in-chief and editorial writer for Global Times, and was awarded with the China News Awards in 2011. He really understands how all these international inner workings are operating, learned that throughout his career, and understands how China and the rest of the world could work to advance BRICS as a union of like-minded people. Mr. Wang, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you for your kind introduction. My name is Wang Wen from China. Actually, it's my second time to visit HSE University. It's a top university. It's a well-known university in China. Actually, I think today this session topic is very important because it represents the process of developing country, especially the emerging economy, in their continuous pursuit and construction of equal world. From the China perspective, I think we think that nowadays there are 2 kinds of unequal condition. One is from the international equal condition. The second is domestic equal condition. What kind? Let me explain it very briefly. The first type of the inequality is that we all know that the international development system or international unequal international economy, trade, and financial order. Especially, for example, the United States has only 5% of the world population, but the U.S. consumes nearly 20% of the world resources. About 60% of the world trade depends on the dollars, right? And then for United States, they just print the paper of dollar and earn a lot of money from the world, especially from China. Because China's real economy is very, very good. With those farmer workers, the salary is very low, and they make production and sell to the United States. very cheap. So China's foreign target, China's foreign policy target is to construct an equal international order. So what we want to say is that we just push the global governance reform since President Xi 10 years ago. He firstly became the president of the country, and then it's his third term. So we push the equal global governance. But the problem is that an equal global governance, an equal international system reconstruction, it's not a very short term, it's a long term. So it's a very dangerous or uncertain process. So if we just very careful for what? We just careful for those disorder, conflict condition happened. So we just very careful. For example, nowadays we have the very big challenges on Taiwan Strait. For U.S. side, U.S. side want to provoke a new war in Taiwan Strait, just like they provoked the Ukraine war. So I think it's very dangerous for us. If the war happened, there will be maybe a stop the China's continuous development or continuous rise, and also will be influence our reconstruction process for equal world. Because if a new war happen, we will maybe there will more and more people die. So there will be a much more unequal condition happen. So that's why we are very careful about it, to balance. On the one hand, we keep the struggle with U.S. and on the other hand, we just try our best to keep a stable international system. That's the first point I want to share with you. Second point is that, in addition, is that on the one other hand, for China's side, we just want to provide more and more international public goods, including we provide the BRI, Belt and Road Initiative. We provide the AIIB, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, and the other international public goods with the other BRICS countries. That's the first point I want to share with you. Second point with you is the second is, that is what is I want to say the domestic inequality. What is domestic inequality? That is the inequality in access to social service by the wealth owner. Because for those for all the countries, the rich person can occupy more social services through their wealth control, and they have their dictated cooks, driver, nannies, etc. And those are low middle income earner cannot enjoy their expensive social service. More importantly, more unequal inequality is that the inequality of existence of the poor. So in many developing countries, those poor people, they live like an animal with no dignity, no health care, and the possibility of dying at any times. So what can China do? What China did in the past many years is that we just want to solve those domestic inequality. So during the time in the past 40 years, we just try our best to solve those domestic inequality. Especially in the past 10 years, we solved those poverty. And last year, we announced to the world that we absolutely solved the poverty in China. And also we try to we push the digital economy. And nowadays, in China, we is close to build a cashless society, and everyone only need to bring a mobile phone when they go out for shopping, traveling. They just have a mobile phone is enough, no cash, without cash. So I think it's very convenient for everyone. And also in any Chinese city, you can definitely get a taxi within 5 minutes, and you can get a takeaway in about half an hour. Very easy. And also housekeeping is also very convenient. So that means what? That means for every people, it's very cheap, can share those social service, which in the past only those rich person can share, can have a social service. That's China's solution to solve the domestic inequality. So I think it's a China way. Of course, I don't want to say that China experience was the best, but for China, it is indeed the most efficiency. So for us, we just want to say that, especially in the past 10 years, under the President Xi's administration, we have the 4 battles. What 4 battles? First battle is anti-corruption battle. That's why in the past 10 years, there are over 5 million officials fall down because of corruption. 5 million officials. You cannot imagine. A lot of officials, they fall down. Because that's the first, anti-corruption. Second is anti-pollution. Third is anti-poverty. And fourth, and anti-crisis. So the 4 anti-battles, make China's domestic body healthy. So that's our logic that if our country, the domestic problem, domestic inequality solved, we don't scare the containment from the United States. So we just keep the balance to and for the other side, you look at the US side. In US side, there are so many domestic inequality cannot be solved. So we trust that the time stands on the China side. So that's what I want to share with BRICS countries. So nowadays, my conclusion is we are in very serious international campaign, international battles between, as my Indian friend said, between global West and the global South. That was so how to a developing country can keep our sustaining. That is, focus on the domestic issues solution. If we can solve our domestic inequality solution, I think the time belongs to us. That's my conclusion. Thank you.
Да, спасибо, господин Ван Вейн. Да, время принадлежит нам.
Thank you, Mr. Van. Time belongs to us. I agree with you. Once again, we're not confronting anybody. We are not in confrontation. If you want to fight us, we may, but we continue to be an absolutely inclusive format organization. And we will more than welcome any Western state, country to be with us in building this new world. And we to better concentrate on our own development, which is key. Now, giving the floor to Mr. Rasigan Maharaja, Director General of Institute of Economic Research and Innovations, Technical University Tshwane, South Africa. During the time of apartheid, he was in student Human Rights Association fighting racial discrimination, and is not only one of the leading researchers in BRICS. Since 2004, he has been developing student self-administration at the university, making this university more progressive. He is an invited professor at Clark University, United States, Federal University in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Racine Maharaj, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. Very kind words, and also to HSE for hosting the series of talks that we've been having.
You know, I want to preface my comments by acknowledging I'm really so impressed, Anil, with the comments you made about the Jim O'Neill origin story. Because if we remained constrained by that origin story, we have no agency of our own, and multilateral ratings agency might as well just tell us what to do. And that was what was being claimed. So, and thanks, Victoria, for also mentioning, our history comes from struggle, and the struggle is not ended, and it continues. So, two slogans. During apartheid, and this year is an anniversary of one of a very significant community organization called the South African Council on Sport. Sport is a big issue, it brings people together. The slogan of SACOS was no normal sport in an abnormal society. And this allowed us to build our own capabilities and capacities as the black community of South Africa against the formal institutions of apartheid. We developed that, such that we were not excluded. Very important point. The second one also comes from another community-based organization, from the Black Consciousness Movement, which argued that if we must free our minds if we want to free the land. And so this again speaks to what Anil's raised, us reclaiming agency. Part of reclaiming agency is also, as our good colleague Wen has mentioned, taking control over the narrative. Because narratives determine things. We can all have brilliant papers, lots of books, etc., but you know, it's what holds amongst the peoples of the world that will drive us forward. So, in that, let's be reminded, our current position, the contemporary conjuncture, remains characterized by combined and uneven development. And again, I would argue that we don't have a contestation of that view. But we need to bring in, as our colleagues have raised, what does it mean to us now? So, notwithstanding global domestic inequalities, the challenge emerging from embedded contradictions in world systems and its ecological impacts are experienced by all, because we occupy a single home planet. And to that extent, as you know, you sat, Nandan, right next to our colleague. We can't be anti-West, just in terms of being against a compass. But we can be against a system that perpetuates inequality and expands immiserization across world systems. And that's what we have to remain attuned to. That's why the notion of realism is so important in terms of how we understand the contemporary conjuncture and its implications. We need to improve and deepen our critique of what's happening. We can put many of us, as we now know, into institutions, but we have to be careful whether we are going to lead the institution or is the institution going to lead us. Yes, and we've seen this before. In South Africa, we have the notion of corporate state capture. We've not gotten to a range of 5 million people being convicted of corruption, but we do have a report from an investigation which is about 5 million pages. That was the Zondo Commission. Yes, so we are faced with very similar challenges, but why aren't we sharing the solutions amongst ourselves to improve what we do? And therein lies, I think, a huge benefit from the BRICS. So, a point around the expansion of BRICS as well. It is a question whether the coherence of BRICS, which has been built very patiently, can withstand bringing in larger, very different countries and economies. And within that, we need to pay much more attention also on, again, colleagues, what is actually happening, not what the textbook told you should have happened normatively. So, while all of us discuss the environment and ecology, Africa is expected to lose over $1 trillion because of carbon taxes imposed by the European Union. You can imagine, we cannot afford that. But we also don't have the resources as 1.4 billion people to improve our capacities and competences to meet those standards. So a question we need to ask, it's not just political fora, it's also scientific and technological fora that we need to express BRICS leadership inside. We need to gain ground. The planetary boundaries is a concept accepted by the United Nations. It comes from a small institution in the northern part of Sweden. But all of us are bound by the measurements done by that institute. Where is our response itself? And here there are huge opportunities for. So the second point, the instruments and formats to encourage greater global stability. While much can be generally gained from the expansion of people-to-people cooperation and collaboration, ensuring coherence is a consequence of the perspectives we have about what's happening around us. So we need to encourage this dialogue, which not only shares views, but allows us to reach consensus points, as you mentioned about currencies, as an example. We need to move the debate beyond just raising the critique towards resolving these contradictions itself. And that's quite key for us. Common and shared perspectives arise from our collective efforts in research and development, which translates into scientific and technological progress, and thereby generates new knowledge. We are sat at HSE, Higher School for Economics. So if you don't mind, Victoria, I also make a little bit of an advertorial. We're in the process of finalizing our memorandum of agreement with the university to teach a master's program in science and technology, studies. It's not science, it's not technology, it's the study of that, which is something all of us can gain from. It will involve an exchange and moving students around, as you said. It's so critical for us to do that. That's the next generation. And where are they being schooled? Where are the textbooks? I remind you all about Paul Samuelson's famous quote, and remember he got to, what is it, edition 30 or 40 or 50 of his famous macroeconomics textbook. He said he's not interested in writing economic policy. All he wants to do is write the textbooks. I hope this sinks in. Where are the BRICS textbooks that offer, that expand on the positive examples being achieved in these countries itself? So I'm going to jump ahead to this notion of the multilateral institutions. And here I also want to raise a small note of caution, and that is the limits of reform. It's very important. Maybe it's just a semantic issue. But there is a difference between transforming institutions and reforming institutions. And we have 30 years of experience in South Africa seeking to reform apartheid institutions. And that gives you a sense of today. South Africa is over 42% unemployment. Every negative statistic applies to us. And this expresses the limitations of reform. We must be quite clear in terms of what is it that we want out of the institutions. And in concert, use empirical data, use facts to shape the theory. Not continue to try and get facts to support theories from the past. We are not in the same period. Yeah? So, increased global risks, climate change, health, persistence of unequal exchange, demands more robust and scientifically informed multilateral institutions. They cannot continue to be driven by rhetoric, which is what is happening. We all want an inclusive economy from a mountain in Switzerland. How is that possible? Yeah, there is no such thing that comes. So championship of the BRICS Plus can advance progressive approaches if we bring together the lessons emerging from, as Professor Wang has mentioned, from our domestic experiences. And how is it that these can find expression in our own developmental strategies and become, maybe contributing, as Professor Rodriguez mentioned, towards the transparent criteria for expanded membership as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rasigan Maharaj. Today, we have at least one new project which is born and will rely on academic colleagues, on Rodrigo de Lima Bayan-Soares could recommend to us someone from Brazil so that we could write up a series of textbooks which could be co-authored by academics from BRIC countries on topical areas, economy, finance, history. I think this could be an important step forward. Let us think that South African chairmanship could become an onset of this project. In the Russian chairmanship, we could present the first results. This is something we should promote. Therefore, for dessert, we have Mr. Knyazev, Ambassador at Large to BRICS, our sub-sherpa to BRICS, the person who has always been given all kinds of support to the academic community and has come and came to BRICS having been involved in NATO-related issues and agenda, and now understanding this home-like atmosphere in BRICS versus others. And thanks to Mr. Knyazev, to the extent we were intellectually have this intellectual required level, allows us to understand the dialogue that the Foreign Affairs Ministry is developing on BRICS. And we would be interested in knowing your perspective, on how we move going forward. Thank you very much, Dr. Panova, for your kind words. I think you overestimate my individual contribution. I think it's, in fact, the accomplishment of the entire ministry with the Sherpa they had, Mr. Ryabkov. I want to thank you for the interesting discussion today here that has shown that showed unity in diversity, characteristic of BRICS. I want to welcome the presentation by my good friend and the Dean, Anil Suklal. Rodrigo de Lima Baena Soares, the Brazilian ambassador, colleagues from India, Dr. Wang from China, and Professor Maharaja. With all the diversity of the assessments made here and the accents, emphasis played, there's unity in one. The power and force and direction of BRICS, it's a family, as Victoria has said. Activity directed cooperation, seeking consensus, a healthy balance of interest, and not directed at anyone. This has always been the motto of Russian chairmanship, that BRICS has never been counter, has always been pro. And the strength is in this, and the attractiveness is in this, which in our turbulent times has been fully confirmed. The world is changing rapidly, as was noted in the new foreign policy concept of the Russian Federation. Humanity is going through revolutionary changes, epoch. We see affirmation of a more just and fair multipolar world. What is this multipolar world in the making? New centers of power, influence, economy. It has been said here that some 20, 30 years, who could speak about such economic center as India, China, South Africa rise, Brazil as a South American giant,
or other countries. So what we see today is the emergence of independent policies pursued by various countries in different nations, focusing on their domestic interests. And the same goes for the Middle East and Arab countries there. And all of that means that we need to advance closer cooperation instead of a policy of pressure on South Asian countries. ASEAN countries are in favor of dialogue, and it did play a constructive role in this last year when Indonesia was the chair of the G20. Now that India has assumed chairmanship, we can see that there is real interest in advancing solutions for true global problems rather than advancing politicized agendas, something that some of the larger countries in the G20 are attempting to push for. As for Russia's foreign policy, it intends to expand its capacity and strengthen the role of the state in our state policy with regard to BRICS. And we can see that the principles of inclusivity, partnership, and consensus that are underlying BRICS cooperation are very close to the countries that belong to the Global South and the Global East. And that's what is so attractive about BRICS to these nations. And BRICS responds to this interest by developing partnerships using outreach formats or BRICS Plus format. Here in Russia, we are of the opinion that there is a need to create a strong network of such partnerships, partnerships with leading developing nations, with regional development and cooperation mechanisms that can play a global role, and that is reflective of the fact that BRICS is a global framework, a global format, and it can serve as the platform for coordinating various integration-leaning mechanisms. There was an idea that was once floated by Russia a while ago. Integration of integration, that's the term that was used. We first started it by offering our hand to the Euro-Atlantic countries, but we can see that they didn't offer us their hand in return. But the interest that we believe there is for integration of integration is a testament to the interest that is shown by what is now referred to as the Global South. And this reflects the interest not just in cooperating with Russia, but in cooperation that is not susceptible to pressure or domination by some center of power, and is rather based on a reasonable balance of power. It is in line with this logic that the practice of trading using national currencies is being developed. This is something that is worked out by the leading economic centers and major nations. There was a recent decision by Saudi Arabia to do that, and the same goes for the agreements reached between Brazil and China. We all know about the practice pursued by India that wants to use increasingly its national currency rupee for trade. And I think this is a reflection of the fact that the new economic centers are not in agreement with having to live in a situation when just one model dominates the world order, trying to impose certain schemes to other countries. I'm consciously trying to refrain from criticizing Bretton Woods institutions or Washington's policies and its allies' policies, who are trying to use dollar's special role for unjust competition, to advance unjust competition, or their policy of trying to use climate change to advance their tax needs. Because BRICS has to be and was designed to be a mechanism for cooperation, a mutually beneficial cooperation for the countries that are part of the BRICS association, but also of those countries that are either a part of its larger circle of like-minded countries, primarily emerging economies, developing countries with emerging markets. The interest in that is growing, as evidenced by a meeting of the BRICS Plus meeting at BRICS 14 last year, a high-level dialogue on development issues with 13 more guests taking part in addition to the BRICS countries, representing leading developing countries. I am confident that most recent developments have shown that this interest is something that is keeping growing despite the pressure that, as we know, has been applied on many nations, with attempts being made to undermine the cooperation that has taken shape within BRICS. With that in mind, we are eager to develop BRICS partnerships with other countries, both developing and emerging markets, economies. And the same goes for efforts that are being exerted to expand BRICS. And let me echo what Sergei Ryabkov said earlier. There is no need to hurry here, although we are not trying to drag our feet with that, or drag this out, as he put it. We are committed to working with our partners, as instructed by our leaders, to develop adequate and needed criteria and develop the necessary procedures and modalities And of course, the focus of our attention will be on preserving that level of interaction, cohesion and dialogue and strategic partnership that we have established so far within the BRICS Association, on expanding these modalities that should benefit BRICS and the Global South, and should not be impeded. This is not an easy process, of course, but with that in mind, we are ready to work with our partners in the BRICS Association to work on that. We really welcome the spirit shown by South African chairmanship so that we can develop certain solutions for the upcoming summit, to present them there. And we are prepared to make our contribution to this effort. Once again, I would like to thank Ms. Panova and HSC for this really fruitful conference that is well represented, and that includes this plenary session on the future of BRICS, which gives us some food for thought. That's always very useful when officials listen to the experts, what they have to say. It's certainly more useful for one to listen to the experts rather than speak at events like this. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Knyazhev. We've gone beyond the time limits for our session by 20 minutes. I was so fascinated by these speeches that I couldn't really force myself to stop anyone. The conversation that we have had was very interesting. Thank you all. It doesn't leave us any time for a discussion, but we can do this on the sideline of this session. And another point I wanted to make is that it was originally thought that we would provide the recommendations that would come out of this roundtable to the others, but in order to make this a more comprehensive effort, if you don't mind, what we would do, we would make a summary of this roundtable. Our researcher colleagues could comment on that while providing their own additions and suggestions, and then we will send out to you a more comprehensive document for review and for using in your work. Thank you once again, and until we see each other again. Now we'll have a group photo of all the speakers and then of all of the participants. Thank you.